Welcome, everyone. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us for today's webinar, which is Energy Investing for Venture Big Ideas and Startups Exploiting Them. I'm Matt Kaspari, and I'm a managing partner at Alumni Ventures, and I'm a leader of our Deep Tech Fund. I'm excited to be hosting this webinar and moderating our panel today. Before we dive in, I'm going to start by reading a few legal disclosures. So we're speaking today about Alumni Ventures and our views of the associated landscape. This presentation is for informational purposes only and is not an offer to buy or sell securities, which are only made pursuant to the formal offering documents for the fund. Please review important disclosures in the materials provided for the webinar, which you can access at av-funds.com/disclosures. A few quick housekeeping items. You will not be on camera and will be muted throughout the entire presentation. We are recording this webinar. In the chat, we'll put a link to Alumni Ventures Deep Tech Fund. So if you're interested in potentially becoming an investor in that fund, I encourage you to review those materials. I will also put a link to our team's calendar. So if you'd like to connect with us directly, you can book time with us there. So in terms of our agenda for the webinar today, I'll start out by giving a brief overview of Alumni Ventures and also our Deep Tech Fund. And then the bulk of our time today will be with the panel going through Q&A. So before diving into the Deep Tech Fund, I'll just share a bit of context on Alumni Ventures, which is the parent organization that the Deep Tech Fund is a part of. So first, our mission at Alumni Ventures is to democratize access to venture capital. So we're here to help individual investors get access to this exciting asset class. Historically, venture has had stronger returns, but it's been difficult to access. Alumni Ventures is America's largest venture firm for individual investors. We have over $1 billion in total capital raised to date across the Alumni Ventures funds, and that comes from over 10,000 investors. PitchBook said that Alumni Ventures was the most active VC in the US and number 3 globally last year. And we've invested in over 1,000 companies at Alumni Ventures. Across the firm, we have about 130 full-time employees and about 40 of us are on the investing side. So the Deep Tech Fund is part of Alumni Ventures, which has massive benefits. So the fund itself is a portfolio of 15 to 20 deep tech initial investments that we make over a period of about a year to 18 months. The fund has 20 to 25% in reserve capital that we use to follow on and make investments in subsequent rounds. And we create diversification in the portfolio by investing across different stages, so seed stage all the way through late stage. We also invest across different geographies, and we invest alongside different lead investors. And our strategy at Alumni Ventures is to be a co-investor, meaning that we don't lead rounds and we're investing alongside well-established leads. So the fund is open to all accredited investors. The minimum is $10,000, although many of our investors choose to go much higher. In terms of the team that manages the fund, we're all based out of Alumni Ventures Menlo Park office. We source companies, we conduct due diligence, we monitor their portfolio, and decide on where we continue to invest. Myself, I come to the role having been a 2-time founder CEO, including Aurora Biofuels, a deep tech company in the alternative energy sector. Aurora raised over $100 million and grew to over 100 employees before being acquired by Reliance Industries about a decade after it was started. And as an investor, I've broad experience investing across many frontier technology areas. Todd McIntyre is another managing partner at Alumni Ventures. He has broad investing experience and was previously a managing partner of Gray Sky Ventures, a life science focused fund. We've got a very strong team with Aleem, Carl, and Narain who bring diverse experiences to the table. So we've been able to back many amazing companies and teams in the deep tech sector. We've highlighted just a few of those companies here. I welcome you to look these companies up and learn more about what they're up to. And I know we're all eager to get into the panel today, so I'll just quickly provide a bit more context on two of these companies. One is Unlearn AI. It's a pioneering technology company using AI-generated digital twins of individual patients to revolutionize medical research. We initially invested in their Series A in 2020, alongside a couple great deep tech investors, 8VC and DCVC. And the company has made very strong progress. And not too long ago, actually announced that OpenAI's CTO had joined their board of directors. Another one I'll point out just quickly is Xanadu. It's a quantum computing company. We made an investment into their 100 million Series C in 2022, alongside some great investors, including Bessemer Venture Partners. So moving on to our topic today, which is energy investing for venture big ideas and startups exploiting them. And this topic comes from a blog post I published about a month ago. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, I will put a link in the chat now. I encourage you to check that out when you have time. And a couple things that I pointed out in the blog post. One is that the International Energy Agency estimates that 2.8 trillion will be invested in energy in 2023. And a fact that many people probably find surprising is that more than 1.7 trillion of that is going to clean energy. So in other words, for every $1 spent on fossil fuels, 1.7 is now spent on clean energy. So startups innovating at the forefront of this energy transformation offer potentially lucrative investment opportunities. And the four investment spaces that I went through in that blog post, one was carbon capture and direct air capture solutions. The second was fast charging infrastructure. The third was local power generation. And finally, the fourth area was CapEx light advancements in battery efficiency. So again, welcome to check out that blog post and learn more. So today I'm excited to dive into a couple of these areas with our panelists. I'll invite them to come on screen with me here. Hey, Mark.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, Santosh, great to see you guys. So we've got, I'm really looking forward to this. We've got two amazing panelists. I'm gonna hand it over to them to introduce themselves and just give a little high level context on their companies. So Mark, if you don't mind, have you start off.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks all in attendance. My name's Mark Sitka. I'm one of the co-founders at Airmine, and I lead day-to-day operations as the COO. My background is in deep tech commercialization. Prior to Airmine, I was working at Chemetall BASF, helping to scale some of the chemicals that are used to manufacture silicon carbide power electronics. Prior to that was at Honeywell, scaling some chemicals for electronics and the solar industry. Really just excited to talk about this topic. There's a lot of exciting things going on. Happy to introduce Airmine and our direct air capture solutions a little more in the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Santosh.
Great. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on the time zone you folks are on. My name is Santosh Alexander, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called WhiteSense, located in Berkeley, California. And what we brought to the market is the ability for commercial fleets, so transportation fleets, to decarbonize their transportation work and at the same time increase the profitability of their business.
Great. Well, we're excited to dive into this, and thank you to our audience members who submitted questions prior to the webinar. We really appreciate that, and I will attempt to weave as many of those as I can into the conversation. So we did have a group of questions that I'd say I'd bucket under, call it kind of the macro environment. So maybe we'll start out there. set the stage at a somewhat higher level. So the first question would be, how does the macro environment impact energy investing, and maybe more specifically, your business? I'll let either of you feel free to jump in.
Good, Mark.
Sure, I can take a stab. It's a complex time, right? I think that many of the folks on the call, through your networks and just reading, it's evolving in a way where there are trends that are moving in a positive direction and a negative direction. In this most recent year was the year when we had the most deployment of clean energy, and also the year when the most coal was used. And these conflicting facts create an environment that builds headwinds and tailwinds for different people in different sectors. And maybe I'll just elaborate a little bit on direct air capture, carbon capture, how that narrow slice maybe fits into this broader energy discussion just a little bit. So direct air capture, for those on the call who may not be familiar with it, is a process where air is passed through some kind of engineered system that pulls the carbon dioxide out for utilization or sequestration. And Airmine is building a direct air capture solution in our facility in Berkeley, California. And this is different from carbon capture. Carbon capture is a bigger subset of maybe pulling carbon dioxide from a flue stream, some industrial process, or it could include the air, but carbon capture is the bigger umbrella. Direct air capture is a more niche field. And if we look at how these broader energy trends in investment are affecting direct air capture, where Airmine sits, we see that the world is getting warmer, that the increased use of fossil fuels in parts of the world where they're going to continue to deploy these mean that in this race towards decarbonization globally, solutions like direct air capture and other types of carbon removal are going to be needed in the decades to come in really large scales that I think are not really being properly appreciated in the discussions today. And so we see just folks who on one side are true believers. They understand that this is something that's going to be part of the future, and they're ready to jump in and support. And then there is a majority that's either still learning about these topics or very highly skeptical, and in some cases with good reason, of some of the developments that might make these technologies difficult to deploy at the scales that folks on the other side are saying. And so it really is something, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but there is this momentum and critical mass, I think, that's evolving around a scientific consensus that technologies like these will be needed. That is, I'd say, giving it a net momentum for our field, and we feel a lot of positive energy from folks like Alumni Ventures and others who are backing us and allowing us to take a serious swing at this problem.
Great. Santosh?
Yeah, so from a macro environment, what I see kind of like what's different today than a few years back is interest rates. Interest rates are no longer zero. And so consequently, hurdle rates for projects have increased. So as a consequence of that, you need projects where investment capital is required to have a true return, because now you've got real cost of capital. So I think that's different. And that, I think, actually is very positive. And I think it's positive because it weeds out the zombies, those that are just sucking in capital without any possibility of a return. And it also narrows the focus to the financial benefits of a project. So that, I think, is a very positive thing that is true because there's true cost of capital. So that's one big macro thing that I see. And in our business, because our business is about enabling commercial fleets, transportation companies whose business is transporting goods or people, they have a choice now that they have to make, is meaning how much capital are they going to invest in decarbonizing their transportation business. And in the United States, transportation right now is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon as a result, right? And so that is going to be a very interesting kind of scenario. And I think one thing that what WideSense is bringing to the table to these transportation operators is that we can allow them to decarbonization and increase the profitability of their business, which in the past could not be done. And so that, I think, is at a macro level, I think that helps us, because now you got true cost of capital, which means now you need true financial returns on a project, and now electrification using wide sense can achieve those goals.
Great. Makes a lot of sense. Another question that came in was, what impacts could the upcoming U.S. presidential elections have? Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to get into politics too deeply here, but maybe we'll keep it on. What do you see as potential scenarios?
So I mean, I would say that, okay, you got two choices here, right? Because the U.S. is essentially a two-party state. And so you got to either go at, A or B. I call it Tweedledee or Tweedledum, right? And and so if Trump wins the presidential election, then all the kind of big government backing, meaning congressional appropriations of large amounts of funding for decarbonization or green energy, whatever you want to label you want to put it, could come under pressure. And I think one should expect that pressure no matter who comes in, primarily because pretty much every major global economy in the world, from a government standpoint, are running large deficits. They're borrowing money from our children and grandchildren today, right? And so that is, in my opinion, is going to shrink over time, because you cannot run these type of deficits forever, and keep borrowing money from the future generations. So I think that is now going to create an environment where economics in any type of investment and in any time of project is going to start to matter, right? It's not just subsidies driving something, And so I consider all of that very positive. So in my opinion, it doesn't really matter, because government funding for these things will decline, in my opinion.
Mark?
And from my side, I agree with what Santosh is saying. The area where I might think direct air capture has some specific overlap is with tax credits. And so tax credit policy is something that has very specifically been rolled out through 45Q and other elements in the administration's recent policies to get different decarbonization technologies rolling. And continued support for tax credits, I think, would be important for the long-term deployment of carbon capture and direct air capture. That's certainly a critical part of the long-term value proposition in a lot of ways, especially at this early and mid-stage when these things are really just getting off the ground. But carbon capture is one of these interesting, and direct air capture, it's an interesting nexus where a lot of the technology development maybe is happening in blue states, but the actual deployment is probably going to be taking place in red states. And there are some very savvy politicians across different sides of the aisle who are interested in these technologies for different reasons. And in that overlap, in that narrow consensus, which is sometimes hard to find in today's politics, there seems to be a window where serious people are realizing that there's a need for these things that we're building. And there's an economic case that can be made that sort of threads the needle. And is it going to be hard? Yes. And is it a real challenge depending on different political outcomes? Yes. But there's a window there, and it's one that I think is looking durable. The other area where I'd say kind of this ties back into a macro thing is that there is an election coming up, but it's carbon removal and carbon dioxide challenges are a global problem. And there are governments around the world that are taking, their own view, and there's different coalitions of governments that are taking a longer view of ways to get involved. And they also don't want to miss the boat. If any of these technologies that are starting to get deployed, they're like us kind of doing this broad search to look at the regions in the world where it makes sense to deploy. And for a lot of reasons, the United States makes a lot of sense. We're getting great government support for a lot of these projects. But there are other parts of the world that want this too, and they understand that they need to create an environment that is attracting projects to them in a competitive world. So certainly a lot to think about. There's different ways that the election could cause our field to go, but it does seem like there is some middle ground that's saying this should happen.
Yeah, great. Maybe somewhat of a follow-up. I mean, what do you see as the role of public-private partnerships, and the role in terms of, what's the best way to leverage it to accelerate growth of next generation energy technologies? Kind of what are your thoughts? And I think Mark, it's interesting, thinking about that public side globally doesn't necessarily need to be, in the US.
No, I think it's a fantastic question. There is a need for public-private partnerships and other more novel structures to emerge to aggregate demand and maybe qualify the demand for different types of carbon removal technologies. So getting a little bit into the weeds here for a minute, that for carbon removal, there's generally people think about offsets, and offsets are sort of like the forest-based, land-based credits that people are maybe familiar with in the news, and they're rightfully getting a really hard time in the media as folks understand some of the quality issues that can be associated with some of these projects. There can be good projects, but there are many that are now well documented to have serious problems. And then there are removals, which is some kind of process like direct air capture, where you're physically taking carbon dioxide out of the air and documenting it in a way that's more robust, one hopes, than some of the forest-based offsets. And and this maybe ties into some of the things that Santosh is talking about, that where is the demand for this? Where is the durable economic model of who's going to pay for all this activity? And right now, I think a lot of the folks have to be very honest with the fact that there's some open questions there. There is private sector demand, no doubt, and there is public sector interest and support. And at this interface of the public and private sector, there are these structures that are emerging for advanced market commitments and other types of groups of people coming together, like governments. I think it was through the UN, there's a mission innovation project tied towards carbon removal that say we need to come together and articulate exactly what we want from this ecosystem, and we need to put some carrots here for these companies to be aiming for, give the private sector a little bit of a push or some momentum or a model to follow as they sort of get more comfortable with the idea of these technologies deploying. And that's sort of something that from our side we see as a really important void that public-private partnerships can fill. One other area where I think this is starting to take some shape, without going into too much detail, ties back into that verification side and trust. And is this activity that we're doing, removing carbon dioxide from the air, who's stamping that with approval that means something? And in many cases, it's going to be requiring folks from the regulatory side, from government, from the public sectors, this could be international or it could be in individual countries, coming up with frameworks that the private sector, whether it's the buy side or the supply side, can accept and think are reasonable. And this is another one of these voids in a rapidly emerging, unfolding sort of nexus of stakeholders, where people coming in to add some clarity, add some serious perspective, adds a lot of value for folks like us who are on the side just trying to develop these technologies in a way that we think makes sense. But yeah, lots of opportunity for folks to come in on those sides.
Great. Santosh, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, in the transportation sector, public-private partnerships in many ways have existed for a very, very long time. I mean, you got to build the infrastructure, right? You got to build the highways. In the 1950s, they built the whole highway system, and that was in a way a public-private partnership, in the sense that the government came up with what they wanted to build, and then the private industry built the highway system, right? And so I think in transportation, you always have kind of room for private and public partnerships. And if you want to move to a new energy fuel source for transportation, meaning electricity, then there is a requirement for all this infrastructure build. And so this infrastructure build, if it is thought through in a proper way, could be done very efficiently. Meaning the amount of capital required overall will be much less, rather than piecemeal. And so an example that I would give, which was piecemeal, is when you look at cellular network infrastructure that got built. In the US, you had multiple standards, multiple CDMA to GSM, whereas in Europe, they went with a single standard. So a role that government can play is to standardize. If you can standardize, then private industry could come in and offer solutions to those standards, right? Rather than everyone trying to compete and think that, I'm going to own the market, and so I want a proprietary environment, right? So yeah, I would say that standardization in electrical transportation would mean, common interfaces for charging, common interfaces for data, common interfaces for telematics from vehicles. So these type of things like that. And the challenge that I see with public-private partnerships is that it's so complicated. It takes so much time to build consensus to those things, right? And so sometimes in these infrastructure transformations, the government sometimes may have to step in on their own first to establish standards, establish some kind of, let's say, a roadmap and some funding for that roadmap, right? That I think could be helpful, in this kind of transition, because the transition is very infrastructure heavy.
Great. Maybe shift from kind of the macro to a little more of the micro and get into your companies a bit more specifically. So Mark, maybe tell us a little bit more about Airmine, and really would be interested to hear how was your approach differentiated versus the competition or other companies that are out there?
Certainly. So Airmine was founded in early 2022. So we've been around for almost 2 years. It's myself and my co-founder, Sudeep. We both come from industry. So I was at Chemetall BASF, and prior to that at Honeywell, and Sudeep spent 16 years at Honeywell as their director of innovation. And when we look at carbon removal and maybe specifically direct air capture from that industrial lens, I think there are some reasons to be concerned right now with what we see the ecosystem, that there's a lot of emphasis on really novel materials, whether that's MOFs or certain sort of structured zeolites or coated zeolites, I'm sorry. And really technologies that are going to be very, very hard to get beyond pilot scale, whether due to supply chain concerns or infrastructure that's required to build them being very novel. Whereas the industrial world that I'm more familiar with, it's got to be simple. It's got to be like, deep tech cannot be that complicated. Otherwise, you run into these problems down the road that really hurt you. And that could be anything as simple as, cost issues that are going to come bite you when you have a big plant versus a pilot plant. So you have to be thinking from where it's going to go at the very beginning, rather than some core technology that you're going to build the whole thing upon. And I give this whole prelude to say that that's the philosophy that guided Airmine's origination, that we wanted to design a technology and really an approach towards what is a direct air capture technology that could make sense in that sort of long scale-up process, and bring some of the lessons from industry that we have and couple that with this next generation of engineering talent that really believes and knows that this is going to be part of their future, and they want to shape that. And so at a high level, what we have, and I'll just quickly, this is one of the prototypes that we have. You can kind of see what it looks like. That's a capture unit. So what is happening is air is being blown through a fan in contact with a liquid that is capturing carbon dioxide. Air without carbon dioxide is coming out the top. Over time, the carbon dioxide accumulates and saturates in that liquid. And then we move it over to a thermal desorption step where heat is applied. The carbon dioxide comes out and is treated and sent towards downstream usage. And then the liquid is free to be used in that process in a cyclical way. And what I think sets Airmine apart from other folks that are in this space is that simple two-step process, using a relatively low temperature for the desorption, call it 130 C, 120 C, when many others are using several hundred degrees C, is something that gives a more practical approach towards envisioning a DAC facility that's operating at these large levels that it's going to need to be for this to be a viable economic model or to make climate impact. and that is really guiding our, we're prototyping to make these systems and get real process data just to show that DAC is real. It can be done. The technology of getting it cheap is going to be harder than rocket science because of how dilute the CO2 is in the air. But it can be done. We have systems that are running that today. And so we just are trying to continue to use that core technological strategy differentiation approach, build as many prototypes as we can, and get to the stage where this makes sense to try at the larger scale.
Yeah, and I know you guys have been making pretty amazing technical progress, so we probably can't share the details here, but congrats. It's been super exciting to watch you guys drive down cost, which I think at the end of the day is what we're talking about, this efficiency, this approach to scalability, all has to translate into doing this as cheaply as possible.
Thank you. And just wanted to shout out to all on the call that Nat and Akil and Carl, we just really appreciate them. They've been such a pleasure to work with through all this.
Well, thank you guys, appreciate that. Santosh, same question for you, maybe a little bit more about WideSense. How are you differentiated versus the competition?
Yeah, so WideSense is a SaaS software and services company. So we have no hardware that we do. And we bring this software and services to enable transportation companies to essentially transform the existing combustion engine, fossil fuel combustion engine transportation work to electric in a profitable way, in a cost-effective way. So that's the kind of solution sets that we offer. And when there's two aspects of our offering. One aspect is what we call operations design. And so here we take the existing transportation work of a commercial transportation company, a fleet, a bus operator, or a last mile delivery fleet, or a roadside assistance fleet, all kinds of fleet types. We take their existing transportation work and we simulate on a minute by minute basis running electric vehicles on those routes and schedules, on the transportation work. And we can run, and then we can evaluate these simulations across any kind of scenario. An example being every day of the year, because seasonality has a huge impact on the performance of electric vehicles. So cold weather, hot weather, all those things have a huge impact, right? And traffic, load in the vehicle, driving styles of the driver, all of these things have a huge impact on the fuel consumption of an electric vehicle, so energy consumption. So that simulation allows us to inform what type of vehicles, what is the fleet composition when you're going to move from a combustion engine to electric, what should your new fleet look like in terms of vehicle types, quantities of vehicles to do that transportation work that you're doing today, right? Specifications of the batteries. The other part is because we're dealing with commercial fleets and we're not dealing with consumer passenger vehicle, that's not what our focus is. Our focus is on commercial transportation. So there, it's all depot based. So we need to then inform, okay, which depots should be staged with the electrical infrastructure, the charging infrastructure, which vehicles should be staged at these depots, and what should that depot design look like in terms of the geometry of the depot, because now you've got refueling time in hours, not minutes any longer. And so queuing inside the depots become very important. The layout of the chargers and the dispensers in the depot becomes very important. So that's the first step, is the operations design. And with our operations design, relative to the competition, which is traditional methods, and the traditional methods is I have a diesel truck that is reaching its end of life. Let me just replace it with an electric truck. Then let me take a look at my routes and say, what is the manufacturer telling me is the range of that electric truck? Let's say they say it's 100 miles. Then I'm looking at all my routes that I run and say, which are the routes that are 50 miles? And now I'm going to apply those electric truck on those routes. Now that leads to very high costs because your utilization of the electric vehicle becomes very low. So the number of revenue miles that you generate every year is going to be very low, much less than your gas or diesel equivalents, and my fuel cost. Even though electricity should be cheaper than gas or diesel, your fuel costs are very high because you're doing this route by route electrification, which means that when you finish your run, you come back to the depot, you're charging it all up to full, because that's how they do it with combustion engine vehicles, is that all the vehicles, when they come back at the end of the day from their trip, they're refueled to top up the tank. All their washing and other types of fluids are topped up, and then they dispatch the next day. And so this is not a good strategy when you're using electric, because you got demand charges, you got time of use charges. It's no longer just $1 per gallon. So it's very complicated. And so when you do the traditional methods, which is essentially, I'm just going to replace the vehicle, I'm going to wrap our electrification, but my SOPs, which is my standard operating procedures of how I dispatch vehicles, how do I monitor them on route, all of those things don't change from what they've got for the ICE. But you're introducing a new drivetrain with completely different operating characteristics. So your SOPs and your workflows are how you dispatch and how you fuel them and how you dispatch them has to change. And they don't do that, right? And so this is where the challenge comes in. So you've got an ecosystem now, you've got new fueling infrastructure, charging infrastructure. So those guys are going and trying to, influence the fleet, saying, oh yeah, we got everything covered because all you need is the damn chargers, and we've got load management, we got this, we got that, and we can take over. But they have no idea what the transportation work is. They don't know what the energy demand for their transportation work is. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of noise, right? And at the end of the day, you have to take a systems approach to electrification, not piecemeal. Change a vehicle here, put it on a certain route here. I just go buy some chargers and listen to what the charger manufacturer tells me is what should be the ideal thing for that, or a vehicle OEM telling them that, right? None of these guys have actually operated a fleet. Right? Nobody has any experience in what the transportation work is, which is the business of the transportation company. They don't know what the P&L looks like, what the balance sheet looks like. So this is the environment that we're in. And so the reason why WideSense is so successful in the market right now, and we're getting a lot of traction. We're deployed already in 10 cities in the United States, where we are managing the day-to-day operations and the operations design of bus fleets in 10 cities already. Growing now in Europe. We're already doing this for delivery fleets, for roadside assistance fleet, which is all on-demand type of work, right? So the complete spectrum, because we're taking a systems approach, and we're informing them that if they take a systems approach, as our customers have experienced, you can actually operate an electric vehicle fleet on the transportation work at a lower cost than their existing combustion engine fleet doing the transportation work. So now you don't need government subsidies. You don't need regulatory, mandates to do this or that, because it makes economic sense to electrify and decarbonize your fleet, because you can increase your profitability, because you can. And so that is, I think, the value of taking a new approach. And the core to this is the advancements in AI. It is the AI advancements that allow the ability to take the complexity of the operating environment with electric drivetrain and simplify it to in operational procedures that allow them to now deploy electric vehicles at a lower cost.
Yeah, and I think it's just a great example of this broader theme where we talk about, the electrification of the grid, electrification of vehicles, and just the practicality of the opportunities it creates for startups to come in and manage this complexity of something that maybe from the outside you would think, oh yeah, they swap a delivery truck from diesel to electric, no big deal. It's like, no, there's a ton of nuance there. There's a ton of value creation opportunity. So yeah, thank you for sharing the story. We're super excited to be involved in WideSense. So I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. We don't have too much time left. So maybe as this question, we had a couple of people ask this, maybe there's some entrepreneurs in the audience. What's the current state of the market for startups who are looking to raise capital? And also kind of tied into that, how does the general funding environment shape your strategic decisions, if at all? So Mark, maybe have you go first on that one?
Sure. I think it's no secret that it's tough out there right now. It's especially, at seed and Series A, I think we're seeing that good teams and good ideas are able to get what they need to get going, especially in some of these sectors like where we're focused in the carbon removal space. There's a big addressable market if this thing works, and so there's VC interest in being a part of that. And it gets really hard when you get to the point where you need to then build the pilot facility, and VC money is very expensive to build that pilot. So you're kind of walking a tough line to get from here to there. But if you have something compelling, there's definitely interest there. One sort of related sector, I think that's maybe more broad than direct air capture is low carbon heat. And that one is just, it's going to be so important with everything that we see happening with the grid and the storage. It applies to DAC in the sense that DAC is in many times in an Airmine specific case a thermal process. So there's a broad demand for large companies that have emissions targets, and they're really going to need to find something that is better than what they have right now. So low carbon heat is one where I see a lot of opportunity. But in terms of strategic decisions and how that affects and how we're thinking, Airmine has always had, I think in deep tech, especially maybe this is true, you just have to have such a thick skin and you have to be so frugal from day one. It's just, if you've got capital intensive, hardware intensive things that you're building, you really have to keep your expenses as low as possible throughout the early stages and maximize every dollar that you get, because you just don't know what the funding environment is going to be like at any particular time. And like, there's a reason we have this Spartan warehouse, and it's like it's so that money can go towards prototypes and getting the best engineers that we can. And do I think that the funding environment is going to radically change? That's going to allow us to really change that line of thinking in the next year or 2 years? No, not really. I think it's going to be sort of a, however the election goes, however certain things in the macro trends go, it's probably going to be just as uncertainty diminishes, then trends will slowly change. But deep tech companies like us, I think we just have to keep your eyes on the prize, stay very focused and lean, and just try to outlast these long development cycles that you encounter in any type of hardware deep tech startup.
Yeah, great. So just keeping an eye on the clock, I'm going to maybe start wrapping up the conversation. So I'll have you guys think about one final question that I'll come back to really shortly. So that final question will be, looking ahead, what are your predictions for the biggest developments in this field over the next 5 to 10 years? And what gets you most excited? So we'll pull up our slide deck here one more time. And just I again want to spotlight the Deep Tech Fund. So if you are interested in learning more about this, you can check out the links in the chat, or you can go directly to our website for Alumni Ventures. So that domain is av.vc. So again, we'd welcome your interest. We've got over 10,000 investors across Alumni Ventures, and if this is something that could be interesting to you, please feel free to reach out, chat with us. So Santosh, maybe ask you, what gets you most excited?
Yeah, I mean, I want to address some of an earlier point that you had asked and about the investment climate and
Yeah, thank you.
And things like that. I'm an old-fashioned entrepreneur. This is my 8th startup I'm doing. And I think entrepreneurs don't fully appreciate the importance of product market fit. And that means at the end of the day, you've got to solve a problem that someone is willing to pay for, because it costs them to have that problem, right? So that, I think, is something that a lot of people miss, because they get caught up with the hype du jour of something or the other, right? And you've seen, I've been in this industry for over 40 years, the tech industry, and I've seen it, hype du jour and crash, that type of stuff like that. So you got to find something durable. And to find something durable, that means you got to find the problem that somebody has that's costing them money, right? And you got to solve that. So that's the first thing. If you can do that, there's plenty of capital available. There's always capital available. Now, the thing that I'm most excited about is that I think that the transformation of transportation to a new drivetrain, an electric drivetrain, is going to be massive. It's like you've gone from the horse and carriage buggies to the Ford Model T. And in fact, even before the Ford Model T, there were electric cars in the US. Edison was an example of someone that was trying to come up with new battery technologies, but it was not cost competitive relative to what Ford did. And so this is why I think this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry that is going through a transformation. You've got the major manufacturers of the vehicles are committing $300+ billion of capital to do this. Okay, and so now you need the energy infrastructure to build up. You need all of these things that need to happen. And I think an example of this transformation is China, right? China has made this transformation for a strategic reason because they are an importer of crude oil. And they don't want to be reliant on the Middle East and all these unstable parts of the world for their core energy source. So they figured out a program. And now what you see in China is a good example where on a relative basis, the growth in the automotive sector is in EVs, not in ICE. Even though the total market is flatlining, what the growth is all in the EVs, right? And so I think that this is a multi-decade transformation. It's going to take that long. And so you got to find, for entrepreneurs, you got to find value that you can generate in this larger macro transformation that's going to take place, right? Because China's already demonstrated that you can't do that. It's just only a matter of time before others are going to have to do it, because otherwise they can't compete. Right? And you see that in the auto market. The Chinese companies that did not exist 10, 15 years ago are the dominant suppliers in EVs. And to catch up to them, the Fords, the GMs, the Volkswagens of the world are so far behind, because the difficulty that these existing incumbents have is no one knows how to cannibalize their own business. It's happened to IBM. They gave up the PCs because they thought the mainframe was all they needed, right? And so this is the challenge. And so this is why the opportunity exists for entrepreneurs, because the existing incumbents have making too much money out of their existing products have a hard time cannibalizing that business.
Yeah, no, super exciting. Mark, what are you excited about over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I know we're at time, so I'll keep it short. It's the change in awareness that's going to happen as young folks enter the workforce and enter, we had middle schoolers come by and walk through our facility recently. I get to talk with high schoolers, and the way that young people now understand how climate, and this is all over the world, not just in the United States, around the world, young people understand, I think, the gravity of how the climate that they're going to live with will affect their lives. And that's shaping what they do, what professions they choose, how they're going to vote, how they're going to purchase goods. And I remember when I was back in high school, I was not thinking about those things. And I think for many of us, it's a step change in awareness. And I think the implications of that step change across the economy and across society are just now at this rough transition stage, which we're going to have to see how that evolves. But specifically for decarbonization related industries, I think that there's just this social understanding and awareness that is just starting to happen that will drive a lot of the business case and drive a lot of the regulatory case for the industry that we're focused on. And it's just exciting to be a part of that and see where it goes.
Yeah, great. Well, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today, and a very special thank you to our panelists, Mark and Santosh. So both thank you for taking the time. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Take care.